Hello and welcome to another episode of Football Today. I am Josh Schneider-Weiler and I'm joined, as always, by football broadcaster David Goss. David, how many cups of coffee are you on at this point?
I don't need coffee if I don't sleep. The problem is when I wake up, then I feel I need a cup of coffee. But what my key through World Cup qualifying has been is to just stay awake 24 hours a day for about 10 straight days. So I feel great right now. I feel
Nice.
I feel ready to go.
Good, man. Good. Sleep is a cousin of death, you know.
Ooh,
my boy Nas.
whoa. That's artistic.
I know, right? Nas is my boy. But let's talk about, the biggest game of World Cup qualifying of the last week and a half. Something that's got you on the airwaves around the world, Dave. That would be the USA game against Canada. No, we're just going to talk about USA and Canada in CONCACAF in their last week and a half. Not specifically that game, although we will talk about that game. But you were on a Canadian radio station. Is that right?
I'm always on Canadian radio. The Canadians love me, Josh. I'm basically the Bette Midler of Canada.
It must be because of your nice temperament.
Yeah.
It's got to be it. So what, why were you on it? Like what's up with this Canadian team? Like obviously they're for people that haven't been following them, they're sitting on 5 points after 3 matches in CONCACAF. Had a win and 2 draws in the last week and a half. Break it down for us. I don't think people are used to Canada doing this well. Why? Because, this is unprecedented.
So CONCACAF as a region is 41 teams. And normally what CONCACAF has done is similar to Africa and Asia. They have done stages of qualifying where the bigger teams join later and the smaller nations kind of work to get to the end. And what CONCACAF has had for the last 20 plus years has been a final round we call the hexagonal with 6 teams. Now, because of COVID, it's an octo, an ocho, an octagonal. There are 8 teams. Canada has not been to this stage in 26 years. So the fact that they are still playing competitive games in the cycle alone is historic. And then you add on to the fact that they get 5 points from 3 games to open up. They crushed El Salvador at home in their final home game in Toronto, where they have not always played World Cup qualifiers. It's actually a newer site for them to play at. And then, as you mentioned, they went on the road and got a draw against the United States. And so there's a ton of excitement in Canada for this team. The belief is, and we don't know this yet, that they'll automatically qualify for the 2026 World Cup, along with the US and Mexico as co-hosts. And so for the US, for example, in 1994, the focus was to qualify for 1990 so that there was a belief that you weren't just there because you were a host. And Canada is kind of going through something like that in this cycle. Alphonso Davies has emerged as a global superstar. Jonathan David not far behind. And now they've actually filled in a roster around it. It's not just those 2 stars leading. This is a team back to front that over the course of 3 games in this window is able to rotate teams and still put in high performances. They've got players that just got sold to other European teams. They've got players that have played well for Besiktas and in Portugal and across the world. And so there's a lot of excitement. There's still trepidation in Canada. And that's why I was brought on over the last few days to talk on a couple of Canadian shows, basically general sports shows, because soccer or football is still an emerging sport in Canada. Hockey is king, and the Toronto Raptors and Toronto Blue Jays are probably second and third behind that. And I was brought on basically for a lot of people to ask me, is this real? Should we get excited? Should we care? And I believe that you should, and it is. And so that's really fun to see.
Now, obviously, neither of us were at the game yesterday in Canada or on Wednesday. I mean, we're recording this on Thursday. What was the atmosphere like? I mean, is there like a real home advantage when they score? Are they like chugging maple syrup? What's it like out there?
I will tell you, so they're playing at BMO Field in Toronto, which is home of Toronto FC. And since they built that stadium, I think in 2008, Canada is actually undefeated there in meaningful games, but they don't play they hadn't played most of them there. They'd played in Vancouver because...
Why though? Why?
So there's a few things. One is it's hard sometimes to play outdoors in Canada based off the calendar.
Wait, what? Are you serious?
Well, if it's snowing, you can't have a game, and Vancouver is an indoor stadium. So they were used Vancouver because they could guarantee the weather.
Yeah, but
The
that's how
other,
you ensure your home field advantage. You got to make those Guatemalan, El Salvadorian teams come up and play in like the sleet and
yeah,
the snow, a la, when Costa Rica played in, Colorado and it was like a blizzard out there.
yeah, the snow
Like that's
game
your
is what we call
advantage.
it.
Yeah, the snow game.
Yeah,
Like
and Costa
that's your
Rica,
advantage. What like someone at Canada is messing up like right here. That's how you ensure your victory.
So I don't disagree with you. And then the other part was Toronto is one of the multicultural cities in the world, and they
Yeah.
couldn't guarantee a home field advantage. And we've
Mm,
seen this with the U.S. The U.S. won't play Mexico
true.
in a lot of cities because the
Yeah.
U.S. will not be the home team in United States.
Well,
And
famously
Canada,
tell what happened in New York, right? Like, in the last.
yeah, although that the way that is explained. So the U.S. played Costa Rica in New Jersey at Red Bull Arena. People say it wasn't a home crowd. I was there. It was a home crowd. The U.S. just played like trash, and the only people cheering were Costa Rica fans. But we've been to 3 or 4 USA games in
Yeah.
Philly, in New Jersey, in New York, Boston maybe as well, and Mexico is always the home team. So
Wow.
the U.S. has experienced this as well, and that was one of Canada's fears when there wasn't excitement around their team, was that if they hosted Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala in Toronto, they would not be the home team. So they didn't play there. But this moment, this week, was unprecedented for them, and I think has changed a lot. There was an atmosphere that was special, and you can tell in the country now, especially in the fandom, in the supporter sections, that I rub. What do you say there? I come up next to and I'm around and here. Fans want to travel now to go see Canada at home, and they want to be a part of it. And one of the big ceremony things that Toronto FC does after their games is they go over to the supporter section, they take the drum, and they do the Iceland clap or the Viking clap, but one of the players plays the drum. And at the end of this Toronto game, Jonathan Osorio, who's a Brampton native, and Brampton is this suburb of Toronto where basically every NBA player that you know of from Canada, Andrew Wiggins, RJ Barrett, Jamal Murray, all these guys, that's where they're from. It's a very Caribbean neighborhood, and that's where all the great soccer players from Toronto are from as well. And so to have a local guy like him and Atiba Hutchinson lead that chant, and to see the atmosphere and to feel, you could feel through the TV, everyone soaking it in, I think was a special moment for Canada. And I think that's what they're going to take going forward. Is they had to sell this country on believing. And it was a big deal to do it against Suriname and Haiti to get into this round. But this win against El Salvador and the draw against the US has put them on the front page in Canada and has told the fans, you can believe and want this to be a part of something, and you don't have to kind of hide yourself because you're waiting to get hurt.
I feel like Dave's already
so
checking out the housing market in Brampton, and like I feel like you're ready to move there right now. Like you got a real estate agent and everything. Like so you mentioned it's not just Jonathan David who's great forward and Alphonso Davis, that this team is well equipped. Davies, my apologies.
Respect the man.
No, I'm happy. Like I always call you out for your pronunciation, which is awful. But so, and this is kind of a theme that, this is kind of a good moment to bring in the US for as well. So why is it that, they have so much talent? I know like the academy systems in Canada are very nascent. Is it because of these Canadian academies, or are there like other reasons? What's kind of driving this big influx in talent?
I'd say 3 things. The first is those academies having a more professional way to grow up, a better technical ability, as a young player, which allows you to scale yourself to the professional game. That's all been really big for Canada. And that's a part of what will be the legacy of the 2026 World Cup, I think, is the growth of the grassroots game in the US, Canada, and potentially Mexico, although I don't know how much it can grow there.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But the second is the professional setup. And I do a bunch of work for Major League Soccer. So if you feel like I'm being biased in what I'm saying, you're welcome to have that opinion.
Just turn it off now.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking.
But when you look at the team that Canada put out there, I give you 2 examples. So Richie Larea came out of college as a number 10 and got drafted to Orlando and within a year and a half, basically lost his roster spot. And he moved to Toronto FC because he's a local, so they, you know, you can bring him in on his passport. He fills a different roster spot, and he's now become a starting wingback at the Canadian national team. Tajon Buchanan as well went to Syracuse University, a place that Josh is quite familiar with, and he
Syracuse,
left as
stand up.
a tricky college winger that there's excitement around, but he's not ready to be a pro. And he just got sold to Club Brugge for $11 million from the New England Revolution after 2.5 years. The career path for those players didn't exist 15 years ago. So not just developing high-level players, but having enough professional spots for these players to find their careers. It doesn't happen for everyone at 21. It doesn't happen for everyone at 18. And so there's been a lot of Canadian players who have kind of washed out or have been without clubs for long amounts of time. The joke was always Unattached FC was the biggest employer of Canadian national team players. And they put out Gold Cup rosters in the 2000s, and half the players or a third of the players would literally not have a club next to their name, and it would just say unattached.
That's brilliant.
And that doesn't exist anymore. So that gives these players a platform to play off of. And when you look across the team that won against El Salvador and drew in Canada, a lot of players spent time with one of the 3 Canadian MLS clubs. So I think that's really big. And then the third one is Canada's ability to convince dual nationals to play for them. And I give Junior Hoylett a ton of credit for that. A guy that a lot of people in England will remember. He's played with Cardiff and he's bounced kind of back and forth.
QPR, I remember.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
He's Jamaican, British, Canadian. And he chose Canada over those other 2 countries. And I mean, he didn't get a call up from England, but he made the decision at a time when most players chose other countries. The famous one is Jonathan de Guzman, who started a bit for the Netherlands. His brother Julian chose Canada, and he still chose to play for the Netherlands over Canada. That's how much players really didn't want to be a part of this Canadian program. And since Junior Hoylett's chosen, a lot of the players who are Caribbean born or Caribbean parents born in Canada have chosen to play for the U.S. Jonathan David's eligible for Haiti in the U.S. He chose to play for Canada. You know, you look across this team, Kamal Miller's eligible for other teams. Kyle Larin as well. And for a lot of them, Stephen Eustachio, who is a name we'll all be familiar with very soon. The rumors
all
were
right,
that
stop showing off. Stop showing off, Dave. All right, we know you know a lot of players on the Canadian national team. I'm joking.
But the rumor was that Porto was in for him in the last window, so he's going to be a huge part of that. He was eligible to play for other countries as well. A lot of these players, it wasn't even like an announcement. Normally, right, Josh, you and me know as U.S. fans, when Serginho Dest chose the U.S., it was like an announcement. Some of these Canadian players, it's assumed now, which is completely unprecedented for them. That is something that's happened in the last 5 years for the first time ever. And that has led to so much more talent being a part of this program.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you know, Caribbean players choosing to play for Canada. I know that I heard you mention on your, you know, post-game show talking about how Jamaican players, you know, or English Jamaican players are choosing to kind of go back and play for Jamaica. So that's maybe something we'll dive into kind of maybe in future episodes. You know, I think, you know, 15 minutes on CONCACAF is a pretty good. We'll leave
That's
it for
your fault. You should have opened this door.
It. No, I know. I knew what I was getting into. It's good. I, you know, learned a lot hearing you talk about Canada, and you know, I have ancient roots of my family that lived in Canada, and extended family, like fifth cousins that live in, you know, in Canada. So I'm here for it. But you know, I think now's a good moment to kind of move on. If you're here for more USA coverage, you know what? Just listen to Dave's Club and Country on Extra Time. Just type it in on YouTube, and you'll get way better insight than we can do in the next 10 minutes. So let's just move on to CONMEBOL. Good old fashioned South American football. Lot of interesting things here. So many places where we could start, but I think the obvious place, right, Dave, is Brazil, Argentina. Yeah. I mean, do you want? We can talk about something first if you want.
I think that's pretty unavoidable to not start with.
Yeah. So Brazil, Argentina. This was something I was like fucking juiced for. You know. Sat down on my sofa, was super excited, put it on. And then, as I think everyone knows, there was no game to be had. Well, I mean, there was for about 6 minutes. Sorry,
which is the
you
most
know.
ridiculous part.
For those of you who have been living in a cave, about 7 minutes or 6 minutes in, the Brazilian health authorities stopped the game to take off some Argentinian players. There are four Argentinian players that came from England. Christian Romero, who was at Tottenham, Giovanni Lo Celso, Emiliano Buendia, and I'm blank. Oh, and Emi Martinez, the goalkeeper. Mm-hmm. So those were the four players. Anyway, they stopped the game in the 7th minute, to literally expel these players from the game and kick them out of the country, to deport them mid-game. I can't, Dave. I have to assume you've never seen anything like this.
I've never seen a player get deported from a soccer field before. I've seen players get arrested. I've seen players do other things.
No. I mean, for South American soccer, that would not have been a first. Yeah. But like, it's absolutely absurd. And like my wife, I had to call on my wife at the time, and she couldn't believe what she was saying.
In fairness, just to clarify that sentence, Josh is still married. He meant he called her in at the time. She was not his wife at the time and is no longer currently his wife.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah. Super important there. Anyway, so the backstory is essentially they got approval from CONMEBOL, but no one thought to talk to the health authorities in Brazil. Like, I don't know how, like, I read that they got permission from CONMEBOL and therefore they thought it was okay. But it's like, but they're not governing the country. CONMEBOL isn't like the overseer of Brazil, like, so I it's absolutely absurd. And so they ended up postponing the game. And so kind of further even background is a bunch of teams in England refused to let their players go play in Brazil, in South America, because of quarantining issues, because every South American country is on the UK red list, and therefore you have to quarantine. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that, but
I'm pretty sure it's 100%. Maybe there's like French Guyana or something, but like 100% of the CONMEBOL countries. And so that you would therefore have to quarantine 10 days when you return, and not only quarantine 10 days in a hotel where you can't be fit and you would lose fitness. So it would be even more. So that's kind of like the whole big controversy, and this is still raging on. And there's so many different elements to this. I mean, like literally, two of the players, Argentinian players, were fined from Tottenham, Lo Celso and Christian Romero, because they did not do this with the permission of the club, and they just essentially went AWOL seemingly. So they're going to get fined by the club for doing this. And it looks as though Davison Sanchez will do that. It will be as well, because he appeared in the Colombia game. So
you don't know that your player has flown to another continent? I think there's any possibility of that?
Listen, this is all like, that report came out today that they were going to fine them on Thursday. So I don't know. This is all still developing. So that's kind of the context. I mean, we don't have to get into the like gritty details, but, and you would have known these guys are coming. If you're the health authorities, like, this was reported in like they could have just picked up a newspaper and found this out. They could have been playing fantasy football and known like this was happening. So anyway, like,
I appreciate that the story is that the Argentine players lied on their visas when they entered the country. It's because they didn't want to say they were in England. When they play games,
that's what I mean.
On international television, we all know where you were, and I don't believe that part. Those are the parts of the stories that I don't totally believe.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was like, if you played fantasy football, you would have known.
Right.
You would have known. Like,
if anyone in the ANIVAS or whatever the acronym was, the Brazilian Health Organization, has any Aston Villa or Tottenham players on their team, they would know at that moment. The whole thing was ridiculous, and then, as I said, the most ridiculous part was, so those players were all in the starting lineup, and they allowed them to kick off and play 6 minutes of action, and then this guy in pants not
Yeah.
and part of the FA, not dressed in a police
Wait,
uniform.
wait, wait, Dave. Can you imagine the conversation that the health department must have had? Like, they published the lineups an hour before the game. Like, like, do you think like someone got a call and said like, "Oh, I just turned on the game. There's 4 players that
We
lied on
found
their
them.
visas. We found them.
Yeah.
They're at the game. You have to go and stop the game right now."
It
Like,
and that's where the famous photo that I think has kind of come out is so this guy comes on the field. There's a fight. The Argentine players walk off the field, and then Messi comes back out in a photo bib because I guess he doesn't
yeah.
want to wear the jersey and can't find any other clothing. I don't understand that part. And him and the coach for Argentina are debating with Tite and Neymar and all of them about it, and then the Brazilian FA officials come over as well. And you could just see what Messi was saying, which is we've been in this country for 3 days. So why'd you walk on the field 6 minutes into the game? You could have told us 3 days ago, 2 days ago, yesterday, an hour and a half ago, 2 hours. Like that's the part of this that's ridiculous. And that's the part where people feel is a little fishy is did the Brazilian health officials and the Brazilian FA and the Brazilian government work together to allow this game to kick off? So in some way it would be a forfeit different from the game being rescheduled or the game being canceled because of what Argentina had done. So
no, Dave, it was clearly they saw them on TV.
Right.
They realized it. They found them, and then
they couldn't find them because,
yeah,
of course, you don't have to register at all where you're staying to any extent.
Dave, I mean, to suggest otherwise would be conspiracy. Really.
Absolutely.
No, but I want to get into actually like a conversation about because this is not an issue that will die, after the games finish tonight, because South American qualifying is finishing on Thursday night. So by the time this comes out on Friday, there'll be a whole round of games that will have finished. But this is obviously there's an international break in October and in November. And so like, where do you stand on players and essentially club versus country? Like, should players be allowed to like essentially vacate their club team for 2 weeks or miss 2 weeks worth of games to go play for their national team? And actually just final context, the CAS, the Court of Arbitration for Sport, ruled because the Liga did not want to allow their players to go, and the Court for Arbitration for Sport upheld FIFA's ruling that they have to let them.
Mm-hmm.
So this is already, as legally concerning, finished. So, but where do you stand? Like, do clubs have a right to say no? And what about the national team? What about the players? Because obviously it's evidenced already in this, and this would be kind of my point that the players wanted to go. I mean, they literally went AWOL. They're going to take a financial hit. The players that we mentioned from Tottenham and Davison Sanchez potentially as well. So where do you stand on this?
I'm obviously a sucker for the international game, and I love it. And the reason it's so important, especially in parts of the world that aren't Western Europe, is for a lot of people, it's the only time you get to see your best players play because they don't stay
100%.
with your clubs very long. They don't even play with your clubs now at this point with the attrition rate of players leaving from the youth levels. And so for countries that live and breathe the game, like Colombia and Ecuador and Peru and Argentina and Brazil, their one chance to see these players is when they play in World Cup qualifying or when they play in international tournaments. And so I think it's really important, the international game. I think it's really important to most of the regions around the world. Unfortunately, the clubs that a lot of these top level players are playing on aren't in those regions. And so you kind of have these differing sides. And I think it's unfortunate. The most unfortunate thing about this whole thing is just the lack of leadership from FIFA. And I look at it and say, why did you have to play an extra Copa America this summer? You should have been playing World Cup qualifiers in that time period in South America, where they then would have enough time to go back and quarantine in Europe going into the season. And you wouldn't have had to have as many of these windows. You wouldn't have had to have as many games. And that's where the lack of one cohesive leader in the world of football is really frustrating. We've talked about it a ton with the Super League and all these things of there's 18 different entities and they're all kind of talking at each other and no one's really working together. And that part's really frustrating to me.
Yeah, and so just to kind of hear how that would be different. So they're playing 3 games in these windows. instead of the traditional 2. So you would be able to hypothetically, if you had played some of these games over the summer, play less games in these windows and get the players back earlier, and they
Or
wouldn't
even
have to
maybe
miss
eliminate some of the windows.
or eliminate, or yeah, exactly. Maybe eliminate one of the windows at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, 100%. And I think it goes without saying, yeah, FIFA could be better and could be,
And
show better
CONMEBOL's
leadership.
corrupt and
And,
all.
and this is actually one of those times where, like, actually these federations and organizations are needed. A lot of
Right.
the time, they're not actually that necessary. But this is one of those few times where it's actually important to have organizations and have leaders. And they, of course, have dropped the ball, as they seemingly always do. Um, but it sounded like you were just kind of riding that fence, Dave, and just saying, like, obviously FIFA should have done better. We get that. But, like, where do you stand going forward? What should, if you were Gianni Infantino, what are you doing? I know I personally stand on the side of the national teams. If you have to miss a game for your club, then you have to miss a game for your club. I'm sorry. Like, these guys might never get the opportunity to go to a World Cup again. Like, if you're Davison Sanchez, to use an example, by the time the 2026 World Cup comes around, he might not be able to go. He shouldn't have to miss out on an opportunity to go to the World Cup because Tottenham needs to win one more game in October of the season. And Colombia right now is in 5th place on 10 points before this round of games that's happening on Thursday night. And there's a very real possibility only the top 4 qualify. The 5th goes into an intercontinental playoff. And it's easy for you to say, like, oh, no, he is getting paid millions by the club. Yeah, we know. We understand that, which is the argument. I get that. Listen, I'm a Liverpool fan. Like, I don't want, like, my best players, the starting goalkeeper, the, best midfielder we have, and, an important attacker to go off to Brazil either. But at the end of the day, like, these guys deserve to, in my opinion, choose. They should be able to choose whether they get to go or not, because, like, this might be their only time going to a World Cup. And that's what you dream about when you're a kid. More often than not, these guys dreamed of going to a World Cup. They didn't dream about necessarily winning a Premier League.
Okay. You've made most of the argument I'd love to make. The counter is the money thing. I will throw this one thing in there. Is just,
well, then let them forgive their paychecks for those games then.
Well, they're being fined. You'd assume that that's kind of ends up being the same, right?
No, I know. But yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, if that's really, like...
But the conversation is not the money, right? It's the
the
70
points.
million Liverpool put in to buy Alisson.
Yeah.
And the money they would lose if they didn't qualify for Champions League by 2 points and he misses a game. The one thing I will say, though, in terms of the choice, and sometimes this is where it can get murky, is I know examples of players that didn't want to go to national teams asking clubs or FAs to say something, to say, because they don't want to say no. They don't want to be known as saying no.
Of course.
So I will just warn you that this can be murky, because sometimes out there are players and agents behind the scenes telling clubs and FAs, you should ban us from going so that we don't have to show that we don't want to go. Just
of course, yeah. Yeah. Although, I mean, COVID is the perfect excuse to just be like, I don't feel comfortable, fine. But yeah, I mean, we could talk about this till we're blue in the face, but I feel like we've covered, mostly what at least I wanted to cover. We could talk more about CONMEBOL if you want. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time, but, like, just because there's a whole slate of games that are happening tonight that we can't even, talk about because we don't know what's going to happen, obviously, and that could change the complexion of it. But at the moment, it seems like Ecuador are kind of in the driver's seat behind Brazil and Argentina, who are pretty much dead on to qualify probably at this point. Ecuador is on 13 points through 8 matches. They're 18 total games played, so they're still almost less than half of the games played. But it seems to me, they're in the driver's seat right now. There's a huge game they have coming up against Uruguay in the next window, their first game, which is absolutely huge. Uruguay is behind them in 4th place on 12 points. And then, as I mentioned, Colombia is on 10 and 5th. Absolutely huge game against Uruguay. And then they play home to Bolivia and then away to Venezuela. And to me, if they can, the hard part is it's at Uruguay. and then at Venezuela, but it's home to Bolivia. If they can get potentially 5 points from that, they are in the driver's seat for sure. In my opinion, in World Cup qualifying, which is huge for a country like Ecuador, and it seems like this is kind of also a real down moment for a lot of teams in CONMEBOL, with Uruguay struggling. They're kind of going through a transition from the Edison Cavani Suarez days, and then Colombia as well, who have done really well the last 4 or 5 years, kind of not doing so hot. I mean, there have been in the last 10 games, sorry, I'm rambling here, but in Uruguay and Colombia, between the two of them, in the last 10 World Cup qualifying games, between the two of them, only 2 wins. So there's kind of a big transition in South American football right now
Yep.
between the teams at the top.
No, we saw this, and you'd know better than anyone. You spent some time down in Ecuador around the
Yeah,
2006
love
World
it,
Cup,
baby. Rio Bamba.
and that was a great generation and team. And then that
Yeah.
team goes away, and then we saw Chile rise to a level that was unprecedented in Chilean football history. And then we've seen Peru since then. So you're always going to see, as a golden generation comes through and cycles out, the next country that's ready is going to sort of take the mantle there. Um, and Ecuador, I don't think they haven't 100% proven yet, based off their schedule, that they're ready.
No,
They've
no, they
won a
haven't.
ton of home games. They've won at Bolivia, I think, and at Venezuela, which are the two winnable away games. But they have beat Brazil at home and some of the big teams. The interesting thing about Ecuador to me is they've played a really young group now for about 3 years. And so there's been a commitment to building this next generation. And when you look at it, I think on average, almost 50% of their starters came through Independiente de Valle, which is a fascinating story in Ecuador. You have the traditional giants of LDU and Barcelona in Quito and Guayaquil, but this club de Valle has basically built themselves on, we play young players and then we sell them on, and that's how our club operates. And they've gone to Copa Sudamerica semifinal and Copa Libertadores they've competed in. Mose Caicedo, who just came to Brighton, was rumored to go to Man U, was the latest jewel that came out of that team. But 6 or 7 starters in the last game they played have come out of that de Valle academy and that club. And so that's one of the really interesting parts of this whole thing, that I'm looking
their
forward
coach
to playing out.
And their coach too is still somewhat new to the team. I mean, when this pandemic started, a year and a half ago, their coach was Jordi Cruyff, and we did an episode on Football Today about it. And in the span of the last year and a half, they've changed coach, and they're still by no means over the hump. I mean, I think before, a win that they had in this window in their first game, I think before that they had gone, a good 5 matches without getting a win, in all competitions, including the Copa America. So they're by no means a great team, but a 4-2 win against Uruguay and a 6-1 pounding against Colombia, that's showing their mettle. The second most goals scored in CONMEBOL qualifying. So definitely an interesting story. I know I'm personally rooting for them. As you said, I spent 5 weeks there as a 15-year-old. So absolutely great. Any other thoughts on CONMEBOL before we hit Europe?
No, it's a little upsetting that, as I said, with the chance to watch these players, that we haven't had fans in the stands for these games.
Yeah.
Because we talked about this off air, but to me, this is the last round of World Cup qualifying because of the expansion of the World Cup. And so while you'll have it, and there'll be a level of interest over the next 2 cycles, because new countries are going to be engaged, like what we've seen with Euros, where now you're not talking about Germany and Netherlands qualifying, but it's interesting to watch a Scotland and a Wales have an opportunity, and that will be interesting. But the war that was CONMEBOL World Cup qualifying, just 2.5 years of games in front of sold out crowds at the Centenario in Uruguay, when Cavani comes back and the crowd's behind him, and at altitude in Quito and at altitude in Bolivia. That was one of the toughest World Cup qualifying cycles, and it was one of the most unique to watch because every country's in it and everyone plays everyone, and there's not these groups and these setups. And so it's really sad to me that we're, in my mind, missing the last one in its true form.
Yeah, although I mean, I do think we might see fans there in October or November. I think we might.
Fingers
We'll see.
crossed.
Um, yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, but
Well,
let's
now that Brazil's taking it so seriously, right? The government
yeah.
all of a sudden, Bolsonaro loves COVID restrictions all of a sudden.
I mean, he's just a responsible guy.
For sure.
Traverse 10,000 miles and head out to Europe. The team that is kind of caught my interest. So there's a team and a group that kind of have my interest in this window, and that the team we'll start there is for me Germany, and we documented that obviously Yogi Love left in the summer and really just finished really poorly at Germany, and in this window with their new manager Hansi Flick. 3 straight wins, 3 straight clean sheets, and they went from third, I think, in their group, coming off a loss to Macedonia, to now comfortably in first. Combined in those 3 wins, 12-0 goal differential. I mean, to be fair, these were games against Liechtenstein, Armenia, and Iceland, but this is World Cup qualifying. Like, there's no such game, no such thing as an easy game, or especially even if, maybe it's a slightly easier win if you play
San Marino.
yeah. But like, even if Armenia is, and Iceland, while they're not like great teams,
For
like,
sure. There's
you
talent.
have to earn it. And I'll put it this way, winning 4, and 6-0 in those games is impressive. Like, they only beat Liechtenstein 2-0. So to win 6-0 against Armenia and Iceland, really, really impressive. And that kind of has my focus. I'll dig in a little bit further in a moment, but I mean, Dave, any thoughts? Do you believe that Germany might be back as a powerhouse in European football again?
It feels very similar to what Hansi Flick did at Bayern. And when he came into Bayern, it was a team that was struggling to create chances and was slow and methodical. And he just ratcheted everything up to 150 miles per hour, and everything was direct, and he pressed high. And when you watch Germany this window, that's what you saw. And one player in particular stands out to me, and that's Leroy Sané. And you didn't see
I
the
was
best
hoping you were going to say it. Yeah.
Well, you didn't see the best of him at Bayern, and obviously the ACL's injury was a big part of that. And Hansi Flick took over, and he was one of the best in the world. He was who he can be. And we haven't seen the best of him for Germany, and you saw the best of him this window. And so I think what Hansi Flick wants to do fits so much, if not all of the talent for Germany, right? Goretzka and Kai Havertz and Timo Werner, they want to be downhill players. They want to go towards goal. They want to play that way. But for Leroy Sané, I think if you can unlock him, you're talking about a De Bruyne level attacking player that can carry you through a tournament going forward.
Yeah, I'm really happy you mentioned him. I mean, I think Germany was just really looking for their next Lukas Podolski, a guy who thrives on the international stage and maybe doesn't perform quite as well in the club game. But I just want to go through a couple things about this German team. Lothar Matthäus, after the game against Armenia, was just like drooling, just in his praise for the team. He said, quote, "It was a dream evening of soccer for German soccer. After many years, again, a German team that thrilled the fans. It was a super game by the German team and a convincing team performance. Standing ovations. The wave went through the stadium 5 or 6 times. So they got a wave. It was that good of a performance. Lothar Matthäus was going crazy. And, you mentioned Sané. He scored 2 goals in this window. Timo Werner scored 2 goals in this window. Serge Gnabry scored 3 goals. Like, that is a potent, when those guys are firing, like, that is an active, athletic front 3. If you look at their kind of team, and so their formation is a 4-2-3-1. It seems like at the back, there's a pretty straightforward foundation. Rudiger, Sula, Thilo Kehrer, and Jonas Hoffmann. All of those guys started most of the games. And then in the middle, you don't find a better midfield or pivot. Joshua Kimmich, Leon Goretzka, both those guys play together at Bayern. I always think it's a little good if your national team has a couple guys that already play together at club level. And then I mentioned that front attacking, triumvirate or foursome of Werner, Sane, Gnabry, and then you got your Havertz's, your Musialas, and your Vertz's. That's just it's still a super talented team.
Mm-hmm.
Like people might not have said Yogi Love didn't have all the tools at his disposal. He had a lot of talent still. We're still talking about Germany here. Like those guys have insane abilities, and I think any other national team besides like bar 3 or 4 would be thrilled to have the guys I just mentioned.
Yeah, and this was what we talked about though about Euros was like no one wants to take over for Euros, but he kept leaning back on the old guys, and he did it again. Yogi Low did at the European Championships this summer, and I think it's just slowed what's happened here. And that's again, it was a big window, and Germany's in a fine place, but this could have been sooner.
None of those guys are Love's guys.
Right.
Like the only one of those guys I can think that like played decent amounts for Love was like a little bit towards the end, Gnabry and Kimmich, and maybe I guess Goretzka.
I mean Kimmich was a starter, but it was right back,
Rudiger,
center mid, right back, center mid, which has always happened
Rudiger
to him.
a bit. But like most of these guys were not starting at all for Yogi Love. Which is also interesting because obviously, Hansi Flick has history with Love. So really interesting. And just so many young guys. Like that starting group of the attackers I mentioned, Musiala, Havertz, Florian Wirtz, those guys are so young. Those guys are all like under the age of 23, like, or right around there. So really, really fun team.
Yeah. They were definitely one of the teams to watch. The group you want to talk about, which I think I agree with you
please
on.
jump in.
So wait, let me make sure I get my letters right. Group G, which is the Netherlands, Norway, and Turkey. Netherlands and Norway drew 1-1 this week. They're tied on the top of the group on 13 points, and then Turkey sitting right behind on 11 points. And I think Norway's one of those teams everyone's got half an eye on because of Erling Haaland and his emergence as a superstar. And now you take that back to the national team level. Norway's had some success in the past, but they've never been, a global power. Can he be something that pushes them, and Odegaard as well alongside him? And it's taken them a little while to find their feet, I think, at the international level. There's been question marks about formation. How do you put it all around these players, and can they lead at such a young age for a national team? And I think the feeling after this week or this week and a half of play, to me, Josh, is they can, and this could be a team that goes to a World Cup.
You can easily make the case they should have won that game against the Netherlands. They had a number of really good chances, hit the post. If Haaland had his finishing boots on that game, he could have easily had a brace, and we'd be talking about them leading the group by themselves. But they don't have that pedigree of saying that like at least I don't trust them to necessarily get out of this group, to say nothing of get out of this group and make the playoff. Turkey behind them is 2 points behind them. Turkey really, really rough window, a draw, a tie, and a win. They drew to Montenegro to start it out, and they gave up a goal in the 90th minute at home in Istanbul. If they win that game, which they should have, we're talking about all three teams on equal points, on 13 points. So Norway's still definitely not secured of getting second in this group at all. And the really interesting thing is Norway plays Turkey in their next game in qualifying, and then after that there's only 3 games after that. So that is a huge game. And the really hard thing about it for Norway is that's at Turkey. And
a reminder, because we did a special going into the Euros, and Turkey was one of your teams that you were excited to watch. The reason was because in the March window, Turkey blew the Netherlands off the field with a 4-2 win. Then they went to Norway and won 3-0. And I think it was 2 goals in like 15 minutes from Burak Yilmaz to really open that game up. So this isn't just a huge game for Norway. It's kind of a boogeyman for them. But on the flip side, since that game, Turkey basically hasn't looked like the same team. They struggled in Euros, as everyone saw, and then they struggle in this window as well. They also drew Latvia coming out of those two big games against the Netherlands and Turkey in World Cup qualifying before the European Championships. So there's two squads, it feels like, teetering. Feels like the Netherlands have found their feet after Frank de Boer, and I actually thought they were good in the Euros. The red card was what changed everything in the knockout game, and I think outside of that, Netherlands would have won that game. And to go to a quarterfinal at the Euros, I think is fair for where they're at right now. But it feels like the Netherlands have found their feet, and the question mark right now is between Turkey and Norway, who can put together enough of the results to get.
You say that. I think it'll come down to that game. I think it'll come down to that game. I mean, if Norway can go to Istanbul, get a draw, the final 3 games they have there, I believe, are against the 3 bottom teams in the group. So,
no, they finished with the Netherlands.
You're right. Yeah. But I mean, by then the Netherlands might have sewn up the group, right, and true, they could just be resting guys. Squad, but we'll see. I mean, who knows? But by then that might even be like for the group. That could be for the group at that point. So super fascinating. I think it really comes down to one of these 3 teams is going to be devastated to be knocked out at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even the team that goes to the playoffs is going to really be feeling it and be under the microscope a bit. It'll be really interesting though. I mean, there's a lot of parallels between Norway and Holland and Sweden and Ibrahimovic kind of back in the day. So we'll see if they can get to a major tournament. Any other thoughts on Europe? I mean, those are the kind of the 2 things I kind of took away from this window. But I realize we're running already quite late in time. These episodes are just getting longer and longer.
Listen, if we got to get around the entire globe, then it's not going to be a quick show. No, I think that's most of it. Right now, it feels like most of the big teams are going through. I was really intrigued by the Sweden win over Spain. And I think Kulusevski and Isak up top are special, and that's going to be fun to watch for years. But then they dropped the game to Greece right after. And so that's kind of thrown a wrench in all that. Otherwise, there's not a ton of surprise throughout the competition. It'll be interesting to see Group F as well. Denmark, Scotland, Israel, and Austria right now. Scotland to Austria is 11 points. Israel's 10 points, and Austria is 7 points. Those are all teams that know each other pretty well. They've played each other a ton because of now with Nations League.
There we go.
These teams that sort of sit in the same bracket, it feels like keep playing each other over and over and over again over the last year and a half. So that'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah. Well, as you said, we're globetrotting. We're trying to get around the world in 80 minutes at this point. So let's hit,
let's pour some soju and some mackerel.
There we go, fridge. Baby. I love it. Heat up the grill. And go out to Asia, where to me there's really only one thing, because it's still early days in World Cup qualifying out there. They have stages like we were talking about before in North American qualifying. And so this is the 3rd round, and there are only 2 games, and this was the first window of the final round of qualifying, and everything was pretty much chalk. Oman, the only kind of surprise was Oman beat Japan on the first match day, which is obviously a little bit surprising. But other than that, it was all chalk, all the big teams winning. Australia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, South Korea, pretty much everything going according to plan. To me, the real interesting thing is, and it just kind of, I was just reminded of this when we were doing the prep for this, that because Qatar, of course, took essentially a spot from Asian qualifying, like one of these top teams is going to miss out. So the way it works is there are 2 teams of 5, I think it is, and
2 groups of 4.
6. Sorry. It's not a 4. No, in each group, I only on this little screen grab, I only put out 4. But I believe there's, I believe there's 6 actually in each group.
Okay, start this whole thing over, Jeff. Yeah, and cut it.
No, sorry, I got it. So anyway, so the top 2 of each group qualify, and then the 3rd place of each group play against each other for the right to play in an intercontinental playoff. Okay. So at the moment, the top two in Group A is Iran and South Korea, and third place is the UAE. It's, to me, pretty clear it's going to be Iran and South Korea going to directly qualify for that. But Group B, on the other hand, is way more interesting because there's Australia, Saudi Arabia, and Japan.
Can I pause you real quick?
Yeah.
Just, you're wearing your South Korea jersey right now. It's not a
I
video,
am.
so no one else can see. Taemin Gook, but there is question marks right now around South Korea. They scored 1 goal through this window.
Yeah.
They had, I believe it was at UAE and then home to Lebanon. They were only able to score 1 goal. They fell to Japan right before the summer in a friendly as well, where they didn't score. Bento Flores, the famous European manager, is now taken over. There's a lot of frustration around this group. And when you watch them play, they're creating chances. And you have in Son a world-class player that maybe we haven't seen in the region ever at his level. And so there's worries that South Korea is not going to take advantage of this generation that they have and this ability that they have. So that's something to watch out for. That's something to know. And I think we could both say that the last 2 World Cups, they've been underwhelming. And there's been more expectations that they could compete to get out of the group. And obviously they beat Germany, but that was when they had nothing to play for in 2018.
100%. But I have zero worries that they are not going to qualify over the UAE. Mm-hmm. I'm not worried about that, or Syria for that matter. So that's why I just kind of blew by Group A because I'm not worried about that. Yeah, they've been underwhelming. Yeah, they'll probably stroll or walk and struggle through, but I'm not worried about that. I want to talk though about Group B, Australia, Saudi Arabia, and Japan. One of those teams is going to end up essentially in a playoff and probably in an intercontinental playoff. Japan, via their loss, they're 3 points behind Saudi Arabia and Australia. They're the ones that should be, really worried at this point. I mean, not really. There's still 8 games left to qualifying, but it's going to be an uphill battle. They have not had to worry about qualifying, I don't think, really in this way before. Not recently. It's been 24 years, I think, or no, 1994 was the last time they didn't qualify. Right. And so if they end up in an intercontinental playoff of going against, the South American team or the European, North American team, that's really going to be hard for them. They've never been in that position, I don't think, in an intercontinental playoff. So that's something that caught my eye. That big loss for them against Oman, didn't even draw.
Yeah. When I watched the Australia-Vietnam game as well. And Vietnam's one of those.
What a hipster! No,
yeah. Vietnam's one of those up and coming countries right now. They won the Southeast Asian Games championships, I think, a year back. And they qualified quite well to get into this, by the way. They had a bunch of wins to get in here that where they don't normally perform so well. And Australia won 1-0 on the road in that game, but they were not dominant. And so I think, to me, the deciding here is not going to be the head-to-head games. It's going to be who drops points to Oman, Vietnam, and China over the course of this. That was my point in saying that is I think when you look at Japan, Saudi Arabia, and Australia playing against each other, I think those results are going to end up netting out sort of equally. And it's going to be who's made the mistakes against the other teams that leaves someone out.
Yeah. And, just since you mentioned them, China still through 2 games didn't score a goal. So, I understand. Yeah, I understand. They might not be qualifying for a World Cup now or even in 2026, but they got to be making progress at some point. And so far they are not. But that's all I really got on the Asian qualifying. It's still early days, so don't want to get too bogged down there. But I know you got some to talk about when it comes to African qualifying and CAF. Yeah. Let's dig in, man.
So this window was the first window of this latest round for CAF. So you've seen World Cup qualifying in Africa because you've had teams that are playing to get into this stage. But right now we have 10 groups of 4 each. And then the winners of each group will face off in a home and away series for the final 5 spots in the World Cup. It's the same setup that we saw last cycle, which was new to what Africa had done in the past. And there was a lot of frustration with the way it played out. A lot of people in Africa feel like it's not a fair way to have this long process to end in a 2-game knockout
It's
for your
not.
best teams
First of
to
all,
go
it's
through.
not. It's not. Like, you know what they should just do is like make it way more like South American style because the continent is so huge. You just can't do that. Like,
Yeah.
and
But
when I say South American style, I'm saying over the course of 2.5 years and like not in this essentially in the matter of like two games.
right. And you end up you probably need a situation where you have the bigger countries that get buys till the later rounds and like you said probably end in some massive 10 group or 2-5 groups where those teams are able to play everyone so you can have injuries or make mistakes but still because I don't think it's just that it's unfair. I think it's worse for the region. You want your best teams in a World Cup. You want the teams that are ready to compete at that level at those tournaments. And a lot of times that has not been the case over the last 20 years or so. So when you take a look in Africa, there's a lot of big stories going on outside of through this first round. Algeria, who are AFCON champions, they remain undefeated in Group A, and there's expectation that they could be the leaders for Africa at the next World Cup. Obviously, Mahrez and all the talent that they have, and they were able to at least draw Burkina Faso on the road, which is the team that you'd expect to challenge them in the group. In Group F, Egypt fired their coach, Hossam El Badri. He hasn't lost a game as head manager, and he got fired after 2 games in the cycle. He not just in this cycle, he has never lost the game as the head of Egypt, and so they fired him. They beat Angola at home, then they went and
Did you imagine
Gabon.
how much of a dick he must be then?
Well, taking over for him is Carlos Queiroz, who does not seem like the most cuddly guy in the world, and obviously has never coached in Africa before. I don't believe. Oh, maybe he coached South Africa at
I
some
don't know. He
point.
did a really good job with Iran, so
He
I
did do a
give him
great
the
job with
benefit of
Iran,
the doubt.
and he was definitely the name that's been out there. He took over Colombia, and it didn't go well. I don't think he fit their style very well, so he gets appointed. And then Gabon, where feels like Aubameyang's last go around with them, they were not able to get a win over the course of this cycle. They're already behind the 8 ball, and it feels like maybe he'll never get a chance to push that country to the World Cup, which is unfortunate because it was a big decision when he chose to play there at the level he was at.
Wait, can I go on a quick tangent just because
Go.
you said that before we hit the big story that you want to talk about? We were just talking about how it's just 5 spots for the World Cup plus the intercontinental playoff. So the biggest would be 6. Like I am a fan of expansion of the World Cup.
Yeah.
To 48 teams precisely because of this reason. The fact that Africa gets, 5 spots for what is it, 60? I think 60 countries.
I think
or
it's 68 50? Or 71, something like that.
And like, for every other region, obviously like South America gets 4 for like 12. Essentially, I mean, I'm not saying that it has to be directly proportional for how many countries there are in your region, but like they are like far and away the, biggest, country or, you know what I'm trying to say,
Yep.
numerous amount of countries for the fewest amount of spots. And like, it's kind of crazy that, there's not really a chance, just, it should be like the 10 group winners. That's it, full stop. And they get to go to the World Cup. So I'm looking forward to it going to 48 teams. I don't think it's a bad thing. And I hope that Africa ends up going from, 5 spots to 8 spots or 9 spots in the new thing. And I think it's a good thing. So sorry, we have to get to the big story, but I just want this is when people talk about, oh, it's going to be a bloated World Cup. No, this is why. These are like, I want, countries that haven't had the opportunity because it's Algeria, Egypt, Ghana and Nigeria every time. Like,
well, Egypt won AFCON 5 times and couldn't qualify for a World Cup because they kept getting stuck in a 2-game playoff against Ghana, and that was it. But both of those countries at that time, and not as much now, deserved to be in the World Cup and should have been. So I agree with you. And I think also then you start to talk about how can Gabon build around these big games that they'd have because they do legitimately have a chance. and that's where you can sort of expand the game down and grow it out across the world. One last quick one, and then I'll hit the big story. Group G, South Africa beat Ghana at home. So the Bafana are first in the group. They've obviously been absent from a World Cup outside of the one they hosted over this millennium. And Ghana has been one of the flag bearers for Africa, but they are still in this down moment, even as talent starts to push through in some big European clubs. But in Group I, the big story is Morocco coming off a 2-0 win against Sudan. They were scheduled to play at Guinea when a military coup broke out. The president, Alpha Conde, who rewrote the constitution last year to allow him to run for a third time for president and win, the military took the capital. They arrested the president, and Morocco had to be escorted out of the country a couple hours around when the game would have even happened. And I think what I've heard is a lot of the Guinea players actually left as well, and left the country. So it's a fascinating story that's going on, a global story that's happening that impacts obviously way more than the sport. But this is one of the things that's, incredible about World Cup qualifying is we're talking about COVID protocols in Brazil, and we're talking about revolutions in Western Africa, and we're talking about international relations in Asia because everything football touches. And so I thought this was a fascinating story, a wild story. And from a sporting point of view, we talked about it a little before we came on. This is a big Moroccan side. This is a Moroccan team that performed well in 2018, but all of those players have graduated and gotten better. And, Hakimi might be the best right back in the world. And so there's a lot of promise with this Morocco team. And this was an interesting curveball that they had to deal with.
I mean, Hakimi, and this is coming from a Liverpool fan, is the best right back in the world. But it's actually during the coup, he took a photo, I think from the team bus, just a selfie, I think, and said, "I'm all right, guys, don't worry." But they said that there were all the Moroccan players could hear gunshots from their hotel room all day long. I can't even imagine what that must be like to be stuck in a hotel room and literally hear a coup going on outside in the streets the day that in theory you're supposed to, or the day before you're supposed to play a game.
Yeah.
Can you even imagine that?
So
and
can I just say,
and by the way, wait, and just to tie it, because we talked about Brazil, this shows how much these guys want to play, that they're willing to go to these depths. And obviously they didn't end up playing the game, but they're willing to play despite the instability, or willing to be there despite these issues, which really shows their commitment. But yeah, sorry, go on. I keep interrupting today.
No. I don't have anything else to say. I was going to just bring up Haiti. Their national team played through a coup in the final round of World Cup qualifying that they tried to get to this latest round. I think it was in May and June. So it happens, and it's pretty tough for a lot of these teams. There was 2 coup attempts, I think, in Mali, which is right next door to Guinea already this year. So it's been a problem in the region, and there's a lot of worry that it's leading to a level of instability in the region that hadn't really happened over the last 20 or so years. So it's something to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean,
Stay educated, baby.
Hell yeah, baby. I think we've touched more or less pretty much every big thing going on in World Cup qualifying. I mean, if there are other things that are catching your eyes, listeners, please send them our way.
I know 0 things about what's going on in Oceania. I don't even know if they have qualifiers.
That's for the next international break, Dave. I'm sure there's a huge match between Samoa and Vanuatu. We can get real deep in Oceania qualifying.
We'll do a tactical breakdown.
Of course. TIFO style. No, but let's.
It says it'll start in January of 2022.
Oh, perfect. Right after the World Cup.
World Cup's in November of 2022.
Yeah, so right after that. No? Oh, in January? Yeah, so I don't know. I'm confused.
So the World Cup will be at the end of the year, and January is in 3-4 months.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm fried. After all that talk,
You need coffee.
Sounds like I do. All right. I know it was a 3-week break, listeners, but thank you for being patient and staying with us. next time we come to you, we will not be doing World Cup qualifying. We'll be doing surely something different because we'll be back in the club calendar. But as always, if you enjoyed what you heard, subscribe to us, contact us, let us know what you thought, and tell a friend if that, if that strikes your fancy. So as always, Dave, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Bye. The music for this episode was provided by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find more information about the music in the episode show notes.